Now, the House is scheduled to vote on it this evening, and it is a bill that the White House has gone on notice as saying that doesn't protect the people that it should, all the people that it should. Joining me now is the Congresswoman who introduced that bill, Representative Sandy Adams. Congresswoman, it's great to have you here, and we learned that you've added this amendment to the bill, a manager's amendment, which would include immigrants and Native Americans, but the bill would still exclude members of the LGBT community. Explain to everybody why exclude gay and lesbian victims of domestic violence.
Well, that's a false pretense that you're saying. It does not exclude anyone. It is an all-inclusive bill, has always been an all-inclusive bill. And what we've said is that we want it to remain an all-inclusive bill. Once you start listing out groups or listing in groups, then you're excluding out other groups. And we don't want to pit victim against victim. I believe that the bill has been and always will be a victim, all-inclusive victims bill.
Do you list Native Americans?
What we said was there was some concerns with the way that they could approach getting the protection orders, and we have given them that avenue through the district courts, so U.S. district courts. So I believe that is a reasonable aspect of the bill. It's not listing victim or victim. What we're saying is this bill has always been an all-inclusive. If you're a victim, you're a victim. And I keep saying that. It's a victim-centered piece of legislation because all victims are included.
If it is a victim-centered piece of legislation, why wouldn't there be defined terms for how those victims fall through minority issues in this country?
Well, I don't believe that, you keep on this premise that they're excluded. They're not being excluded. And when you have an issue, and such as one was brought up in the committee, those were anecdotal issues that really related to how law enforcement may or may not have responded to a case. That is not included in this piece of legislation. If that's an issue, then it needs to be addressed through the Law Enforcement 101 and any kind of training. Right now, this bill has and always will be a victim-centered bill, which is all-inclusive.
Congresswoman, stand by, because Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky said this in the last hour on Jansen and Company about the bill. Take a listen.
This is illustrative of just how difficult it is to work with the Republicans. It's just sad, really, that we can't even offer amendments.
So now, what is your response to those who say that the environment in Washington has gotten this way, so toxic, that something like this, a bill that's been reauthorized since 1994 without such consternation for protecting the rights of victims in domestic violence, results in this bitter partisan divide?
Well, I think I would agree that it's a shame that it's gotten this far. It's a shame that the Senate chose to do what they did when it has historically been a very bipartisan bill. And you got to remember, I come from both sides of it. I was once a victim of domestic violence at a very young age, and so I got to see it on the inside. I then became a law enforcement officer and responded to those victims pre-VAWA and then post-VAWA. And I understand how important this bill is and the legislation is to the victims of our country. And so I'm not going to get in the middle of politicizing this piece of legislation. What I would like to do is see it authorized, reauthorized, and it's a shame that those on the other side of the aisle want to politicize this and use this as another quote-unquote war on women piece of legislation when it should never have been, and I am just appalled that some people would use this in this manner because it is not and should never have been a political issue.
Congresswoman Spear, that we spoke to earlier in the hour, said she doesn't really like the phrase and she prefers assault on women, and said that most women that are serving now on the right have not spoken out for family planning and the need for proper family planning for women in this country. Are you willing to stand up and speak out for what needs to be done for family planning to address the fact that there is not this assault on women in this country?
Well, I don't believe there's an assault on women. And again, we're talking about the Violence Against Women Act, one that this piece of legislation puts more funding towards getting the backlog of rape kits taken care of so that we can bring these perpetrators to justice, one that centers around the victims of our country, these victims and the victim services that they need. So I would believe that you need to go back to what is the intent, the original intent of this piece of legislation back in '94. And again, I was someone who physically found out what domestic violence really is from an abusive husband at the early age of 18 and 19, and someone who was a law enforcement officer who responded to those scenes, worked with those victims pre-VAWA and post-VAWA. So I would say that we need to continue to focus on what is the true issues here, and the true issues are victim-centered bill, and this piece of legislation is just that. It's a victim-centered bill.
Congresswoman Sandy Adams, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. We're going to be back with much more right after this.